Writer's Read by Lip Tracy, getting that book in children's hands.
Hi, I'm Tracy Grice and welcome to the Writer's Read podcast. I'm a teacher and I'm really passionate about getting kids reading. The inspiration for this podcast came from a quote by American author Nancy Atwell, and she says, "For students of every ability and background, it's the simple, miraculous act of reading a good book that turns them into readers. Because even for the least experienced, most reluctant reader, it's the one good book that changes everything. The job of adults who care about reading is to move heaven and earth to put that book into a child's hands." So this podcast is designed to do just that. It's not only a podcast that can help children and adolescents connect with authors and books, it's also a resource for parents, teachers and librarians who are helping kids on their reading journey. On this special episode of the Writer's Read podcast, we're live at the SCBWI SA Professional Day at the beautiful Bar Smith Library. I'm speaking with best-selling author of over 100 short stories and 50 award-winning books, Sean Williams. Sean will be known to Star Wars lovers everywhere, having written several novels in the Star Wars universe, including the best-selling Star Wars The Force Unleashed. Sean has been called many things in his time. For example, Morales has dubbed him the premier Australian speculative fiction writer of the age. The Adelaide Advertiser calls him the Emperor of Sci-Fi. The Perth Writers' Festival has named him Lord of the Genre. And for the diversity of his published output, the Australian Book Review refers to him as the King of Chameleons. In Adelaide, we are just proud to call this New York best-selling author one of our own. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Tracy. It's nice to be here.
So, Sean, which book are you reading for us today?
I'm going to read from my latest book, which is Impossible Music, which came out a couple of months ago. It's for a teen audience. Okay, well, the novel's about a young rock god, a 17-year-old boy called Simon, who, because of a stroke, suddenly loses his hearing overnight and is forced to reassess his relationship with music and himself as he comes to terms with being a non-hearing person. And this chapter is called Scrote Punch, and it largely takes place 3 years earlier. The hardest thing for me about sign language is this: it's only partly about signing. Not so long ago, people used to think the deaf were mentally retarded. Partly this was because hearing people only interpreted the signs, which was like translating Russian to English but glossing over every word that contained a K, resulting in speech that looked disjointed, simplistic and, well, dumb. There's more to Auslan than the signs, and that's a challenge, particularly for a shy person like me. Nuance and entire meanings are conveyed via body language and facial expression. Ignoring those parts is like deadening a speaking person's tongue with anaesthetic. Embracing them, though, means opening up in ways that feels unnatural, dangerous even. Every grimace, eyebrow raise or head tilt is a window into your soul. And that's why sign language is so confronting to me. It's not acting a part, I'm acting me. It's also why my first live performance was so terrifying. There was Simon Rain, a kid who had been playing in private with his best mates, suddenly thrust into a literal spotlight and expected to shred in front of strangers. There was nothing to like about that scenario. I pictured 1,000 ways the night could end me. Memory blackout, electrocution, bladder failure, catastrophic trouser collapse, each as unlikely as the others. I'm at my most inventive when I scare myself shitless. Rue and Sad Allen, my bandmates, pushed me ahead of them onto the stage. The light was dazzling and it was much warmer than I'd expected. I was glad I'd worn my ripped jeans and a Death Meal t-shirt, our look being teen wannabe hardcore, because otherwise I would have been sweat-logged in an instant. As it was, my eyes felt foggy and I stumbled, momentarily losing my way. Muscle memory from soundcheck guided me to my guitar and its familiar weight gave me an anchor. I turned to confront a sea of faces. And click, hum, the guitar was live. I raised my pick and power chorded the opening notes of our second original song, Thy Ken, a staccato blast of noise, more percussive than melodic. The crowd responded with a mixture of cheers and jeers. There are always friends who think booing is funny, except when they're on the receiving end. The response wasn't unanimous, but that didn't matter. They had responded. Sad Allen, the colour of his skin camouflaged perfectly against the black sheet backdrop, boom-tished to signal he was ready. Rue rumbled on the E string. I played the opening riff again and we were off, just like we'd rehearsed in the garage so many times, but this time with the sound blasting away from us into a kinetic human void and the smell of sweat, other than our own, thick in our nostrils and all manner of unpredicted upsets, such as feedback and noisy cabling and our foldback dropping out at one point and the echo from the far end of the Jade Monkey trying to drag me offbeat in the slow sections. Scrote Punch was on stage. It didn't matter if anyone else liked us because we were having a good time, sharing something we enjoyed with a world that seemed to care, at least partially, because someone had turned up. And they weren't leaving. Not all of them, anyway. We played for half an hour, then we came off, opening act of 5. The only way up, I remember thinking as I left the stage, sizzling with adrenaline. The shy boy had had his first taste of performing. He had finally met a real live audience, and it was love at first sight. So the rest of the book is about dealing with that love when you can't experience it anymore, or it's very difficult to experience. So it's not really a cliffhanger. That takes place in the middle of the book, but it's giving you hopefully an insight into what it must be like to be a teenager or anybody deprived of the thing you most love and that defines you.
For sure. So listeners, if you want to find out how Simon does deal with that, you know what you need to do. You need to get that book in your hands.
Rebecca recommends.
Okay, so I usually have quite detailed notes when I do this segment on the podcast, but today, in front of people and real life, I've got no notes, so let's see how we go. When Tracy said to me that we were doing this and asked me if I would do it, she said, we've got Sean Williams, and I thought, oh, that's really good. I've just started reading Impossible Music, and then I thought, bugger, I can't talk about that one. Sean Williams writes fantasy, and fantasy is the one thing that I don't read. So I like to consider myself a wide reader. As far as children's books go, that's all I read. I don't get to read a lot of adult stuff, but I like to think that I read quite widely. But I do know that anything in the fantasy genre doesn't very often make it to the top of my reading pile. And so when I was thinking about today, I thought, okay, I'll go and I'll find, what can I find? Is there something that I can read? So, and I'm always willing to try anything. And what I realised, I guess, are a few things, is that it's not always a bad thing to read outside your comfort zone. And we did hear, Tracy mentioned earlier that in our last podcast we had Louise Park, and she's the only person really that talked about reading resilience, because I'm a big believer in if you don't like something and you've given it a fair enough go, that it's okay to give it up. But then she comes along and talks about reading resilience and that's not real life and that we should try harder. And I thought, okay, now's my chance. Now I have to try harder. So it wasn't that much of a chore.
I'm hoping it wasn't too much.
It wasn't too much of a chore. And this is the thing, and I guess it's a good thing for me as someone who talks about books with kids and who I know that my reading has a specific path and that there are certain things that I really love and what my go-to books are. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a place to try something new. So I did find a picture book. So I thought, oh, that's easy. I'll do a picture book. That's my first thing. So Sean has written a picture book called My Nana Nellie's Australian Adventure.
Before you go any further...
Yeah, is that not you?
That's not me.
Oh, my God!
Sorry, Rebecca.
That's gold. That is gold.
There are a few Sean Williamses out there.
Oh, well, it's
I'm
lucky.
So sorry.
No, absolutely. You know, you couldn't ask for better content than that, really, could you? That the children's literature expert gets it wrong. So I'm more than happy to take that, and that will make for interesting listening.
Did you like it, though? Because I'm happy to take credit for it if it's good.
It was amusing.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay, now I'm pretty sure you are the Sean Williams, though, in Funny Bones.
Yes, that's me.
Okay.
Yes.
Phew. Now... So apparently my research skills are not as good as these two here, but there is a new book, giant collection of funny short stories called Funny Bones, and there's more than 100 stories in there by over 100 Australian authors, and Sean has his own special take on dad jokes in there. So
Dad jokes or dud jokes? Or are they the same thing?
probably, well, you can decide. If you talk to Sean later, then maybe he'll give you some examples of the treats that are in there. So he does feature in that, and that, thank goodness it is the right Sean. Now, Sean, did you write The Changeling?
I did.
Awesome. And did you write with Garth Nix, Have Sword Will Travel?
I did.
Whew, awesome. Let's start then. With these two books. So these are the two I thought, yes, these are the ones that I'll have a go with. And I'd read both of them, and I read them the whole way through. I didn't give up. Reading Resilience, and it wasn't that hard. The Changeling, and I think what I've realised about reading fantasy is that I still think there are probably types of fantasy that I don't love. But any fantasy story that is set in a world that I can identify, I can cope with that. I can cope, The Changeling is, it's a desert setting, there's a family, it's a boy, it's an adventure. There are some creepy things in it, like the crabblers are horrible. And there's magic, and there are definitely fantastical elements in it, but it is a world that I can understand. So I can, in my brain, my fantasy disliking brain, I can cope with that. And it was good, and it is an adventure, and it is the first book in a series. So it is the sort of book that you do then need to know what happens next, and so it's a trilogy. So that's the first one. I'm holding books up, so people listening won't know what I'm doing. This is what I do at school. This is why I don't need notes. When I physically have a book in my hand, the knowledge just seems to come through my fingers. That's how it works when I go to school, so that's how I was hoping it would work today.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. We also talked, I guess Tracy mentioned about the part of the podcast we have where people read out loud. And again, for a non-fantasy reader, my one earliest memory of being read to was not by a family member, and I'm assuming I was read to as a child, but it was a Year 7 teacher, Mr. Baker, and he read to us The Weird Stone of Brisingamen. Now, I cannot tell you anything about that story, but I have this memory and this feeling of this amazing experience of being read to. So it's a very weird concept that I couldn't retell the story. I have no concept really of what it was about, but I just have this great memory. He also read The Sword in the Stone. So they're two books that I have this great reading memory with no actual recollection of the story. So this is how I combat some reading when I'm not really sure that I can read it to myself, is I'm a massive audiobook listener. I listen to his Dark Materials, The Golden Compass, as an audiobook, and that was one of the most amazing audiobooks ever because it was a cast production and Philip Pullman was the narrator. I listened to Harry Potter because Stephen Fry narrates them, and you just can't do better than that. So I don't consider audiobooks cheating. So I listened to Have Sword Will Travel as an audiobook, and it was awesome. Like, she was such an excellent narrator, the voices for each of the characters and the excitement in her reading. It was one of those things that I really don't think it would have appealed to me as much if I'd read it myself, but to listen to something brings a whole new dimension. And I don't think you're ever too old to listen to a story. And so, yeah, I just love this. And this was funny, and the characters were good. And again, it's the first book in a series, and you've got talking swords, and you've got cool names.
And dragons.
And there are dragons. Hildebrand, Shining, Foebiter. Is that right?
Mm.
Yeah. So I even wrote notes of that because I thought that's the one thing with fantasy I think that gets me is the names. And in my head, I know when I'm reading a fantasy novel that's got weird names, that's my brain blocks things, and that's why it makes it hard. So I actually find reading fantasy hard because my brain's too busy trying to figure out these words that are not in my world that it takes away from the story for me. But when I'm listening to it, it's much better, and I can enjoy the story because I don't have to worry about how you spell that or how you say that. I just get to listen to the story. So I am a convert.
Excellent.
In that I'm not, and I've never been anti-fantasy. And I think back again to three of my favourite books of all time, I think are The Changeover, Margaret May, fantasy. Juniper Game by Cheryl Jordan, it's fantasy. And China Garden by Liz Berry, which is also fantasy. So, and again, they're all, I guess, fantasy novels with a grounding in the real world. So perhaps that's why I can cope with them. So, yeah, I would like to say thank you, Sean, for being our guest today, because it's because of you that I sort of opened my reading eyes to something that I wouldn't normally read. And it's made me realise that, you know, I can sort of push a few things and I can try different things and encourage readers to, you know, it's not just a fantasy story, it's the same story. It's just set in a world where there are dragons and witches. It's still an adventure story. It's still a story about friendship. It's still a story about bravery or family. It's just set in a world that's not quite like our own. So, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me here. Thanks for reading.
Yeah, welcome.
I'm going to look up My Nana Nellie's Australian Adventure. Sorry to rub that in.
Oh, no. Like I said, it's excellent. My credibility is down the toilet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not at all, because I always rely.
Not anymore.
That's okay. It's all good. And great insights into some of Sean's books, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate, just that reading path that they've heard Impossible Music, but, you know, for a different style of Sean Williams' book, a couple of great recommendations there. So thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to move into the chat portion now of the podcast, where I get to talk to Sean about his life as a reader. And most likely when Sean does chats or interviews or school visits, he's probably talking about his life as a writer and where he gets his ideas from. But we're kind of flipping that today so that we can get a bit of an insight into who he is as a reader. So, Sean, what are your earliest memories of reading?
I asked my mother is staying with me at the moment. She lives in Wallaroo, and she's come to stay with us the weekend. And I said, what would be my earliest memory of reading? And she said, you can tell the story about how when your grandmother was reading a book to you and you took over the reading, and Grandma came to my mother and said, you know, Sean is reading already. And Mum went, no, he's not.
Wow.
And apparently I was. So a very early reader from early age. And both my parents were school teachers, so I was surrounded by books, and they never once said to me, this book is too old for you. I could read anything I liked as long as I could hold it. But my mother was studying Kids Lit as part of she was a kindergarten teacher, and she came home one day with A Weird Stone of Brisingamen by Alan Garner, which remains one of the best books I've ever read. I read it every year, and it contains the two most terrifying paragraphs ever written for children in the English language. It's absolutely brilliant. So she was sort of testing me out on fantasy and science fiction because I liked Doctor Who. So I was collecting early Doctor Who novels, many of them written by Terence Dicks, one of the great kids writers from England who died just last month, I think. I was collecting his books, so my mum was trying me on other authors like Ursula Le Guin and Susan Cooper, Alan Garner, of course, and my reading expanded from there until I was 12 and somebody gave me a copy of Lord of the Rings. But I was also reading my mum's books, and she was a big Agatha Christie fan, so my first literary crush on an author was with Agatha Christie. I read every book that my mother had in this big long shelf, read them all in a row. My memory of being a young reader is couldn't get enough books. Just devoured everything I could get my hands on.
That's so good. And I love that your mum didn't put a ceiling on what you were able to read, and that, you know, it was kind of wide open there for you.
When in 1975,
Wow.
As a corollary to that, I was 8 years old and Roots was on TV, and my dad was reading the book, and I said, I want to read that, because you kind of want to do what your parents do. And Dad didn't even blink. He said, yeah, if you can hold it, you can read it. And this is a book full of the terrible events of slavery and kidnap and rape and murder and all that sort of stuff. My parents didn't blink. They just knew that I would find my own level, and if I didn't like it, I would stop reading it if I couldn't handle it. So I read about half of it and then got bored. Because it was too big, you know. It was huge.
So you knew your limits as a reader?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So with all of that choice then, and knowing that pretty much the sky was the limit for you in terms of all of the, you know, the books available to you, did you ever get reader's block?
The only time I ever got reader's block was when I first became a professional writer, a full-time professional writer. So in 1999, I signed 3 contracts that required me to deliver 3 books each, and they were each due over 3 years. So I was having to write a book every 3 months. It was just stupid, but I could do it, and I learned that I could do it, and the books turned out all right, thank goodness. But what I didn't have time for in that period was reading. And I just didn't have time to think about anybody else's writing. And by the end of that period, I was feeling like a wizened up husk creatively, partly because I'd worked so hard, but partly I realised because that I hadn't been reading. I hadn't been soaking up other people's storytelling and experiencing that magic and wonder of being told a story. And it just, as soon as I realised that, I sat down for a month and read nothing but crime novels, and that kind of revved me up a bit again to work on something else. But that reading block was then. It was partly business, but it was partly because I was so busy, but it was partly because I just didn't have room for anybody else's stories in my head. I'll never do that again. I always make sure I've got books around.
Sure. So you're able to regroup pretty quickly and move on?
Yeah. It was a weird experience though. Yeah. I think because these were 3 trilogies too. So by the end of the 3rd year, I'd been with 3 different sets of characters for so long. I was living in my own little claustrophobic world, even though one was a series of Star Wars novels, one was a series of fantasy stories set in Australian landscapes, and was another one was set in the distant future. Even though they were all different, it was still... It's a bit like only eating the same 3 meals every day for 3 years. You kind of forget there's other food out there and that it may also be delicious. And then you think, well, why am I eating the same old stuff? You know,
Sure.
I'm bored of everything. Woe is me. And then somebody gives you a piece of chocolate and you go, whoa, that's right. There's this whole universe of stuff out there. Now I want to eat it all.
So what does that universe look like now, your stack? What's in there? What genres are you reading, and what does that look like?
Well, last year, the only books I read were books by Georgette Heyer. So because I'd been meaning to read her books for a while, and I read one and really liked it and thought, I want to read more of this 19th century sort of romance before romance was defined as romance. So I just kept reading. I think I'd come out of a Jane Austen phase and I was looking for more that was funny and clever and smart. So I read nothing but her books. She has so many of them. I was able to do nothing but read those books. I think I read a Lee Child novel in there as well because it came out and it had to be read. And then this year I'm teaching, so I'm having to put aside the Georgette Heyers and the Dorothy Sayers I moved on to, and I'm reading a little bit of everything. I'm reading students' work. I'm reading We've Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, reading Mrs. Dalloway, reading books that I never kind of got around to read when I was a younger reader. So quite a diverse mix at the moment. And there's a new Lee Child coming in, I think, so we'll have to drop everything to read that again. It's compulsory.
Okay. And then, so do you have time for rereading?
I like to, yeah. So at some point, I'm due a reread of Weirdstone of Brisingamen, and at some point I'd like to read Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin again. Before I went on my Georgette Heyer binge, my friend Garth Nix released a new book that was the 5th book in his Old Kingdom series, and I read it and liked it, and I thought, well, I'll go back to the beginning and I'll read them again. So I read all 4, and then I read the 5th again. So I do like to reread, and I think I enjoy that as a reader, but I also enjoy it as a writer too, because you can start to unpick how brilliant writers have done things.
Sure. Do you ever read the last page? This is a confession now, before you start reading a new book?
Oh no, I don't even like to read the blurb. Or one of the reasons why I love Kindles is you can buy a book and it just appears, and when you open it, you open to the first line. So you don't get any preconceived ideas of what the book will be or do. I was reading Garth's new book, which is out this month, and I was 9/10 of the way through it before I looked at the blurb because I was reading it in hard copy. And the blurb gave away the twist ending that I hadn't reached yet. And I was so cross. And I thought, well, this is why I don't read blurbs. I was thinking, all these people who are going to be reading... I'm getting hoarse because I'm so emotionally traumatised by this experience. And I feel so passionately about it. But yeah, no, I prefer not to. But my wife is different. She'll read the back and then go to the beginning, or read the blurb. Likes to know what she's getting into before she opens the first page. Yeah. I like to be surprised.
Yeah.
You know?
So how then do you choose your next book without kind of looking at the blurb? What's your strategy for choosing a book to read?
Well, sometimes it's because it's by an author I love, like Georgette Heyer or Lee Child. Sometimes it's because I have to for various work reasons. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, quite often, it's word of mouth. You know, I love nothing better than getting a book recommendation from a friend whose opinion I trust, and there are many of them in this room now. And I've got a little stack of books on my Kindle that at some point I will get around to reading, hopefully soon. And on the day that I've finished a book and looking for something else to read, I might pick a book at random and read the opening lines and go, yeah, this is exactly what I feel like right now, or not today, and try the next one. So I have a lot of books that I haven't read on my Kindle. So there's never a shortage of books.
Sure.
It's just a matter of finding the right one. As you said earlier, there's a right book for this week. I just
Yeah.
haven't found it yet.
Yeah, so that, how does your mood then, when you're deciding between all of those books, so say bedtime reading, are you a bedtime reader?
I am.
Given the kind of writing you do, is that what you read before you go to bed, or are you looking for something?
Well, I don't actually read much science fiction and fantasy anymore. I do read a little bit, but apart from George Hire and 19th century novels, I've been reading a lot of Gothic novels, and I love reading them at night. I think because they're a completely different voice to the kind of work that I'm doing. I like to read books that will make me a better writer. Mm-hmm. There's nothing better than finding a book that is beautifully written, and it either makes you think, I'll never be a real writer, because this is so brilliant and I'm just so terrible at it, or it gets in your head and it gives you a little bit of an extra lift, a bit of a hurdle to go over. So I love books that will stretch me a little as a reader and as a writer. And they 19th century books seem to be doing it for me now, or 19th century pastiches. I did read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna. I've forgotten her surname, but that's a massive 19th century fantasy novel that I started reading when it came out 20 years ago, and I was just bored by it. But now it's exactly my cup of tea. It's 800 pages long. I was so sad when it finished because I was really enjoying it. That's the kind of thing that I'm going for. But by the Loo, I also have books by the Loo. So I'm reading old science fiction novels from my childhood there, and the original Gollancz Yellow Jacket editions. So I'm rereading some books that way, because it doesn't matter if it's only a couple of pages a day,
Sure.
whatever. So I like to have, biological functions, going to the toilet, sleeping. There are books there, and I find it very calming and relaxing.
Absolutely. So always having a book on the go, which is great advice. But do you have a favourite spot to read?
Because I'm getting older, if I lie down to read, I tend to fall asleep, which is a real problem, because sometimes you have to read books and you have to finish them, and it's terrible to fall asleep after 5 minutes. So probably bed. Bed is good, and every now and again you'll get a book that will make you feel 12 again. And I don't know whether you did this, but I used to read till 4 o'clock in the morning because I just had to know what happened. And every now and again you'll find a series like the Tomorrow When the World Began books. I was reading them till 4 in the morning till I was physically exhausted. Every now and again a book will come along like that, and it doesn't matter if I don't get any sleep, and we'll be exhausted the next day. Yeah. That looking at your watch and going, whoa, it's 3 o'clock and I don't want to stop, is still such a great feeling. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I can totally relate to that. What gets in the way of your reading life?
Oh, apart from falling asleep.
And deadlines, of course.
Deadlines, yeah. When I'm working on a new book, I have this ridiculous routine of writing new material in the morning and then doing some editing in the afternoon, and then sending what I'm editing to my Kindle and then reading that at night when I go to bed. So it's just this exhaustive cycle of reading my own work over and over and over. So when I'm at that phase in writing a book, I'm not reading anything new at all. And then at the end of that process, all I want to do is eat the literary chocolate that I've been denying myself. So deadlines, and that's it really. Nothing else would get in the way of reading. I think even being unwell, I suffer from terrible chronic pain, and that made me really depressed for a while, and I was adjusting to some new meds a couple of years ago, and was constantly I was not really with it. I wasn't writing. I was struggling to stay awake, and so all I did for 3 months basically was lie on the couch and read endlessly, which was fortunate because I had to judge a literary award, so I got to read all these books, and I swear I was conscious enough to actually determine the mettle of these books, but it gave me a great excuse to kind of heal at my own pace, and that was really valuable. So
yeah, and I think sometimes we feel like we need that. I know reading on a plane, it feels like well, I've got nothing else to do, I'm trapped. So it's a good excuse to read. And I think we kind of get into that habit of sometimes saying reading, like it's like a guilty pleasure sometimes. And because in such a busy, hectic life, it's sometimes we do have to set that time aside. So
it's the only good thing about being on a long haul flight is is putting on the noise-reducing headphones and kicking back with my Kindle in the dark with a tiny glow on my face while everybody else is asleep. It's great. My wife's sitting there watching movies going, why aren't you watching films? I've got a book.
Yeah.
You know?
Get everything I need.
It's so great.
Absolutely. So we've got some young listeners who listen to this podcast. What advice would you give them for finding their next great book?
Listen to your friends, listen to your teacher librarians. My dad's best friend was a teacher librarian. He was always throwing books at me too. Try books at random. If you have a favourite genre and you can't find something like that to read, read a Western, read a romance, read something that you think you'll hate, because there's a strange pleasure in reading a book that you think is terrible too. It's like watching a movie that's bad or doesn't appeal to you. That can still be a lot of fun. So maybe picking up a book to think you'll be poking fun at it, you may actually discover that you love it. And because bad books can be brilliant too. You know, I remember somebody made me read The Maze Runner once, which is technically one of the worst books ever written, but is so compelling I couldn't put it down. I was literally reading it through at 3 in the morning going, what is it about this book that I'm finding so completely enjoyable, even though it's so badly written? I still haven't entirely defined it, but I found it completely gripping. So if somebody you know loves a book passionately for any reason, give that book a try.
Well, okay, so Rebecca and I were talking about this beforehand, and Rebecca mentioned it in her segment. At what point do you have a point where you abandon a book if it is so bad you just can't keep going, or you're just not connecting with it?
Oh, the first page. But I sometimes do continue, or sometimes I will come back to it. So if it's just not the right thing for me on that day, it's not the book's fault. It's not anybody's fault, really. It's just not the right thing for that day. And it'll stay on my Kindle and I'll come back to it. And there have been many books like that. Or like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I gave that up 20 years ago and have now come back to it because I knew I was in the right mood for it and really loved it. I always feel a little bit guilty giving up on a book, but I also think life's too short to read a book you don't want to read. Because real life isn't like that. And I don't read books to experience real life. Yeah. I read books to be taken out of my life in good and confronting ways. So I figure if a book is a slog, why persist? Why life is a slog. Yeah. Sometimes. But that's not to say that books shouldn't be forced through. I had to read Mrs. Dalloway, as I said earlier, this year, and not my kind of book at all. Really struggled with it. And now that I've finished it and taught it, I'm going to go back and read it again with, knowing what the book is doing and having a clearer sense of what it is and having read through it once. I think it's easy to expect a book has to be gripping, has to be a page-turner to be enjoyable and to be good. And this is not that kind of book. This is a very different kind of experience. And I think now going in, knowing the shape of it, I think I will end up being like people who think it's one of the greatest books ever written, And some books like, James Joyce, are supposed to be a real challenge. And that's good. I think there are different reasons to read books. And for personal readings, personal reasons, I will give up a book earlier, but for professional reasons and days I want to be challenged, I'll try really weird things and see how long it takes for me to think I'm done. Or this is the best thing ever,
Yeah, well, some really strong reading habits there, and great advice for listeners who are thinking about books that they're not connecting with or finding hard to get through. So thank you for your advice. Thank you for joining us live here at the SCBWI Professional Day. And thank you also to Rebecca, as always, for her insights and recommendations that help our young listeners to get on that reading path and find the next great book. So thank you.
Thank you.
To keep up to date with all our episodes, make sure you subscribe to your preferred platform on the Ozcast network.
Writers Read by Lit Tracy. Getting that book in children's hands. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram @Writers Read by Lit Tracy, a Dave and the Beanstalk production.